Okay, so give us the top line that you concluded, that you reached in your polling.
Well, the takeaway from the debate is that Trump either gained ground or stayed the same in those 6, 7 swing states that we're looking at. And nationally, over the last 2 weeks, he's pretty much picked up a point a week, going from about 1 to 3. And I think in the big picture, about 4 years ago, he was trailing nationally at this time by about 4 points. So we're seeing a bit of a reversal of what we were looking at in the last election cycle.
So with the national popular vote, which is kind of like the generic non-battleground state polling, he's doing well. And in the battleground states, he's doing well and getting better over the last 2 weeks.
Essentially. And what's most concerning for President Biden would be looking at the states of, let's say, Georgia and Arizona. Those 2 states have been trending towards Trump for 6, 7 months. Most of the polls in Arizona all have Trump leading in that state. If those 2 states swing towards Trump, then any of those other swing states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, if they swing, Virginia, Minnesota, if any of those 5 states swing, then Trump gets the 270 electoral votes and wins. So the Georgia, Arizona is a big problem for President Biden at this time. And then, of course, you got those 5 other states that are either trailing or very close at this time as well.
So as far as I can tell here, you polled all the swing states and we looked at them and we looked at what you found pre-debate versus post-debate. It looks like in Arizona right now, it's Donald Trump up 4 over Biden. Before the debate, it was Donald Trump up 4. Michigan, Donald Trump up 1. Before the debate, Donald Trump up 1. Wisconsin, Donald Trump up 3. Before the debate, Donald Trump up 3. But then we get to Nevada, where Trump, you're showing he's up 6. Pre-debate, you had him up 3. Pennsylvania, Donald Trump up 5. Pre-debate, Donald Trump up 2. And then there's Georgia, where he's now showing in the Emerson poll, Donald Trump up 5. Pre-debate, he was up 4. So in particular, in Nevada, Pennsylvania, and to some extent in Georgia, it looks like Biden really hurt himself with that debate.
And it was across the board that he got hurt. It wasn't just with younger voters or older voters or a particular racial group of voters. And that's the concern for President Biden, is finding that pocket of support to be able to build and get back. In my opinion, just getting to 50-50 isn't enough for the Democrats to be able to win a national election anymore. They have to win by 3, 4, maybe 5 points nationally. So he's got a lot of room to make up.
Okay, explain that. I don't understand that at all. I've heard a bunch of pollsters talk about this, and this is where I get lost.
Well, it's not that the national poll is going to mirror all of the state polls. There'll be some exceptions to it. But what we've seen over the last 8 years is generally, as this national poll goes, it's pulling those states in that direction. So the national poll in 2020 was 4.5 points. And in 2016, it was 2.5 points, both leaning for the Democrats. The difference between 2016 and 2020 is Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania. And so if Biden is able to get that lead from, 4.5 points, that looked like he could take the presidency. Now that he's even, or he's trailing, that's a difficult spot to be in at the state level, because there is some, mirroring of the 2 votes, the national vote and the state vote. So as he's trailing in the state votes, he's also starting to trail in all of these, or in the national vote, he's also trailing in these state polls. And so there's not really like a silver lining at this point, where we're seeing maybe California and New York doing better. We're seeing New York at like 7, 8 points. This is a 23-point state. California is better for Biden at like 20 points, but that's, again, a 33-point state. So what you're seeing is kind of a dropping of the tide for Biden from where he was in 2020. And then the question is, will that help Trump, or does Trump have a ceiling in and of himself, where we've seen the polling kind of sit around 46% nationally? Can he get that number up to 48 to 50% and then be able to split the vote that way and win at the state level?
It's like the Democrat voters have taken a depressant. They've taken some sort of a depressant, and it's being reflected in those numbers. Like the whole electorate seems like down there. But you mentioned the Trump ceiling, and that that number you just said is a problem for Trump. Has Trump ever been as high as 50% with the electorate?
Well, in our polling, we'll do the head-to-head ballot test, and generally Trump peaks at 46, and that's what we've had him at for the last 4 months. But then we do a push question, and that's where he gets to 50%. We ask voters who are undecided if they had to choose which direction they would go in. And at that point, it goes to about a 50-50 race, which is good for President Biden, but not good enough, in my opinion. He needs to get that 2 to 3 points higher on his side. And then the real question is it all baked in? We saw that debate and the numbers didn't move dramatically. What would change the numbers at this point for President Biden to move them dramatically in his direction? And that's what we're waiting to see, if those change at all.
So back in 2016, Trump won the Electoral College, but lost the popular vote, renewing the push by some Democrats to get rid of the Electoral College. I heard an interesting discussion the other day on the Commentary podcast about whether Steve Kornacki was on, about whether there's a scenario this time around where it could be reversed, where Donald Trump could win. I mean, of course, it's always possible, but is there any likelihood that this time around Donald Trump could win the national vote, the popular vote, and not the Electoral College?
I mean, as you said, anything is possible in American politics. We're looking at some pretty close races from 2020, but right now they're not looking that close. Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, those aren't looking like toss-up states that we've seen over the last 2 cycles. They're leaning towards the Republican, leaning towards Trump at the presidential level. There's a different story happening at the Senate level, but at the presidential level, those states are leaning. So it would be surprising. Now, to that point, if the popular vote is down in New York, if the popular vote's down in California, and remember, Clinton really ran up that popular vote in California, but if you let that vote kind of settle and Biden only wins those states by in the teens, there's an opportunity there for Biden to be able to win because he's giving up probably 5-6 million votes between those 2 states and, his leads. And but to me, that would tell me that there's not a rising tide. We saw that in 2016 when we saw like Indiana and Kentucky results come in early that night. I'm like, whoa, that looks like a rising tide. Like, well, this is 3-4 points higher than what we expected. And then obviously we saw how 2016 played out. So we'll see if in this cycle Biden's able to win in a very unusual game plan for the Democrats to try to win without winning the popular vote.
So you're saying when Hillary Clinton won the popular vote in 2016, it was via the route that basically leads Republicans to oppose making this a popular vote election, which is you could basically win with New York and California as a Democrat. They're huge states with huge population and they're almost entirely blue, not entirely, but largely blue. And that's how she got the popular vote as high as she did. But those states don't determine the election because we know they're going to be blue. And it's still very possible for a Republican to get to 270 thanks to all the other states that are out there.
Yeah. And so that was the strategy. And then at the end, she tried to get to Michigan and Minnesota and tried to hold that, Midwest blue wall. But that cracked on her. Biden was able to bring that back to some extent. But the key to me was in the South, being able to hold Georgia and Arizona. That allows the blue wall to get into play. And we'll see if Biden's able to make a comeback in either one of those 2 states at this time. As I said, especially out in Arizona and Georgia, the polling for the year has been leaning towards Trump.
Those states, I mean, when I was coming up at Fox News from 2004 to 2017, they were red states, right? Georgia and Arizona were red states. And then they started to shift more blue, and we started to hear about Stacey Abrams, and Arizona got ticked off during the Trump years, and I'm sure they didn't much like his fight with John McCain, who was beloved, and all that. And then the Trump presidency was somewhat chaotic, and so the more moderate Republicans were irritated. But now they seem to be going back to their roots, having been under 4 years of Democrat rule, at least at the federal level. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, Megyn, to think about it. You have 4 senators from those 2 states, all Democrats. To think about that's where Arizona and Georgia went in the last 4 or 5 years. Kind of raises
the governor
an
in Arizona.
considering, you've got, with cinema now, I guess it's an independent, but those are surprising shifts that we saw in those states. But then there seemed to be shifting back. Kemp wins his race by 7 points over Abrams, where Abrams was in a nail biter the last time they ran. If Trump is up by 5 to 7 in Georgia, again, it's about 270. So how does President Biden or former President Trump get to that number? And those are those key states. So we'll be monitoring to see if there's any movement. But right now, it seems pretty consistent, not just in our polls, but in the other numbers that we've seen from other pollsters.
If you weren't following the news, a massive hit to the US dollar just came in June when Saudi Arabia did not renew its 50-year petrodollar deal with the US. Since 1974, Saudi Arabia has sold oil exclusively in US dollars, and that was huge to America's global economic dominance. Now they want options other than the dollar. So ask yourself, if there's less demand for the dollar, what happens next? Look, it's reasons like this that Americans are looking at Birch Gold Group. For over 20 years, Birch Gold has helped tens of thousands of Americans protect their savings by converting an IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold. To learn more, text the word MK to 989898 and claim your free, no obligation info kit on gold. That's MK to the number 989898. Birch Gold has earned the trust of many with their education-first approach, their thousands of happy customers, and so many 5-star reviews. Consider protecting your savings with gold before the dollar plunges any further. Text MK to 989898 today. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.